In this video, we're going to look at how to create a data dictionary. So I'm just going to exit out here for a second. In a previous video, we talked about data governance. And data governance is one of the policies about how you collect, store, and destroy your data. And we talked about how in data governance, you need to have a common data definition and formats for integration. So you figure out how you're going to store your information. We look at de-identification and privacy, about separating out perhaps the list of participants from the responses in order to protect privacy. We talked there about common data definitions. And so this is to make sure that when we store data for usage, when we do proper usage of the data, we all have the same understanding of what the data is and how the data can be used. So in data dictionaries, we're creating that common definition. So a data dictionary is a document that defines the common interpretation of your data elements. So you might have a variable or a field name. So if we did a survey, for example, each survey question, we would have in our table, this is question 1, question 2, question 3, but we'd also want to just give it a generic name that helps us remember what question 2 was or what question 4 was. So we'll call this a variable name. If it's a database, you might be calling it a field name. So rather than a survey, that information might have been collected in the process of operations or a form that was filled out. And so we have essentially a name for that column of information. In your data dictionary, not only do you have a variable or a field name, but you also have a description. So more information, more detail as to what this variable is about. Then we want to identify the measurement scale. So this takes us back to our previous discussion about types of data, where we talked about the difference between nominal, interval, ordinal, and ratio. So is this data that is categories? Is this data that is ordinal, so it has rank to it? Is it numbers where the numbers have meaning? And what happens with zero? Is zero arbitrary, so it's interval? Or does zero mean the absence of something, in which case it's ratio? We put that into our data dictionary, wherever I put that slide, so that if anyone's using this data set, they know what type of analysis is appropriate, because you do different statistics, different analytics, depending on which measurement scale you have. So if you're handing off the data to someone else, or someone else is using your data set as secondary data, they have information as to how the data can be analyzed. Because we're going to do analysis in Python, we also want to identify the field type. That is, when it comes to our data, where's my thing on field? We can identify that text. So if we have that the information is text, it's not nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. So the measurement scale column is empty. But we need to know that the information is a string. And that tells us that it's text. And so we can use certain methods to analyze text for sentiment, for theme. If we're doing analysis, we want to identify whether or not the information is discrete or continuous. In Python, the terminology is integer for whole numbers and float for numbers that can have decimals. So we would want to identify which one. That will help us as we look at different, we'll get to different distributions. We'll talk about normal distribution, Poisson, those type of things. Which one is relevant depends on if your data is discrete, integer, or continuous, float. You can have fractions. And so the analysis is going to change depending on that data as well. When it comes to data types, there are some other ones we want to hit here. A Boolean is whether something is true or false. And then the other ones that we'll get to later as we start to practice our Python code. But let me just go back to our data dictionary here. So we'll come back to that slide. So field name, variable name, description, measurement scale, and field type help us figure out the analysis. Potential values, we'll use our data dictionary as a key. So for example, if you have a survey, you might actually code your survey. So if we asked you what province you're from, and we turn that into Alberta is a 1, BC is a 2, PEI is a 3, then the analysis, if we're doing it that method, can tell us how many 2s, how many 3s. So we need to know what the potential responses are. If we're not coding it to 1, 2, 3, we still need to know the potential values. So the response to the question about provinces, they could have said Alberta, they could have said BC, they could have said PEI. So we want to know when a particular field or variable is constrained to a specific limited number of responses versus when it's open-ended. You may have a column in your data dictionary about whether the field is mandatory. So if it is coming from a database or a form or a survey that's being populated, maybe it has to be in there. Maybe someone has to provide that information, in which case there's no missing information. How we deal with missing information is going to be different based on the different type of data that we have. And we need to be able to identify why something is missing. Is it missing at random? So there's an equal chance that everything is missing? Or is there a particular trend in why things are missing? Are certain groups more likely to not give that response? We need to know that because, of course, missing information is missing information, and that can then skew the recommendations and decisions you make on it. So you may have a column in your data dictionary as to whether or not that particular variable or field is mandatory. We use our data dictionary to identify relationships to other data. Perhaps we have a composite element. So we have a variable where they wrote in their age, and we turn that into a question that was age ranges. So a composite element is a new variable that comes from the previous question where they wrote a number in. So we might have variables that are related to each other, especially if we have composite elements where we have created new variables that are calculations or amendments to previous variables. And we'll look at how to do that as we clean our data in a later video. You want to identify your origin of your data. One of the things we talked about with big data is that you have lots of different data sources. You are combining information, let's say, from a spreadsheet about customers and a spreadsheet about employees and a spreadsheet about sales, and it's all being merged together to help you analyze. So a data dictionary specifies the original source of information. Was it a particular survey? Was it a particular spreadsheet? Maybe it came from a financial report. Where was the original source? What date was it created? If there are restrictions on usage, that needs to be noted in the data dictionary. In terms of ethic requirements, we can't use data for other purposes than what we present to the people who participate. So if you are collecting data for one purpose and then you want to use it for another, the key is to look at, does that violate the informed consent? And so this usage section here can specify limitations on what can be done with that particular set of information, if there are any limits to its usage. You're not necessarily going to have all of these items. Your data dictionary is going to be what's going to be relevant. But the point of having a data dictionary is to avoid inconsistencies when we input data. So if we're building databases, we want to have a data dictionary. So if I type information in and you type information in, we have consistent formatting. So I'm going to type in the date as April 15th, 2024 as words. If you're just putting information in as March 2024, the data is inconsistent and makes it difficult to analyze. So we might specify in our data dictionary how information is formatted, or in terms of how detailed the information is. The idea with a data dictionary is to have a shared understanding of the information. We're all interpreting it the same. We all know that this variable, this field, gives this information. That allows for consistent use of the data across the organization. It makes the data easier to analyze. It's going to make it faster to analysis because we know based on the measurement scale, based on the data type, what type of analysis we can do. And of course, it is consistent with our data governance in terms of policies about storage and maintaining that data. So let's create a data dictionary. All right, let's suppose that we have a survey. You have a union. You work for the union. The union's preparing to enter collective bargaining. So the negotiations team needs your help to better understand top priorities and concerns. I'm getting lots of rings from my ring lights, driving me crazy. So let's try this, although I'm blind, so it may not work out. All right, your union is preparing to enter collective bargaining. The negotiation team needs your help to better understand the top priorities and concerns of its members. So one of the roles that I've had in the past has been to be the chief negotiator for the Faculty Association Union at Reggio Polytechnic. So one thing I do is I build surveys for faculty so we can collect information as we prepare for bargaining. All right, so you're going to collect this information for bargaining. And in order to abide by ethics, we have here what is being collected, who's doing the collection, that the survey is voluntary, that it's anonymous, that they can skip any or all questions, that how much time the survey takes. And in this case, if we're using a Google form, then we have differences between regulations and policies in Canada versus the US. So if we're in Canada, we're using a US-based survey tool. We want to flag the fact that US laws apply, including the Patriot Act, which means that the information they provide can be available to the US government. But here it's anonymous, no identifying information is provided. So they're informed if they choose to participate. All right, so our preliminary blurb here is to make sure we're abiding by ethical research. So then we have our questions. We have questions about what should the top priority be in the next round of bargaining. Notice this question has an other write-in response. So we create a data dictionary. We want to treat the bulk of the question differently from the other because they will be analyzed separately. The part my face is covering up is what type of contract do you have, part-time or full-time? And you'll notice the line below says if you responded part-time, please skip to the compensation section. That's because our part-timers don't receive benefits, and then those questions they should not be answering. So as we talked in our previous video about how to structure a survey, refer back to that one for some of this formatting. We have questions like, how satisfied are you with the current healthcare benefits? Notice this is an opinion, it's a Likert scale. Number 4, which healthcare benefits should be prioritized? Choices and an other. Then we get into compensation. Do you believe your pay is similar to others at other institutions? Yes, no, I don't know. There's often an I don't know or a neutral choice so that you're not asking people to have an opinion they don't have or force them to respond in a way that doesn't match how they actually feel or are. How satisfied are you with the current salary? In the last year, have you received any non-salary compensation? We have a question here where they're going to rank things in terms of the most important. Then the part that my face is covering, what compensation improvements, if any, would you like to see? Open-ended. They can write anything in that they want. Then we have questions about working conditions. How much control do you have over number of hours, time of day, location of work? How satisfied are you with hours worked, time of day, location? I don't know why that keeps appearing. Very annoying. Another open-ended question, what could increase your satisfaction? Another one here, in the last month, approximately how many hours of overtime have you worked? So a write-in response of a number. Then as we talked about in our survey before, anytime we are getting to more sensitive issues, they're further back in the survey. Remember, we also talked about how you put the multiple choice first and then the open-ended questions toward the end of the section. because they require more work. Here we have the back end of our survey questions that are more sensitive in nature, things like inclusiveness and safety. And then our last questions are demographic ones so that we can see which location, which campus, the people who have positive views, the people who have negative views, is it related to what campus they're located at or how many years they've been with the company. Okay. All right, so here's our survey. Once we have this survey, we want to create a data dictionary. So this data dictionary here, we've chosen to have our variable and field name. You'll always have that column. Description, you'll always have that column. And then here we want scale, measurement scale, and field type. This is going to help with our analysis. We want potential values because this is going to help make analysis quicker when we can identify the different categories, or if we have keyed in the data, we want to be able to do that. And then we want relationships to other variables and origin. I'm just going to go quickly back in time. You'll notice that we didn't include whether fields are mandatory. It's not as relevant here in our survey, so we didn't bother to track it. And we didn't have creation date or usage here. We all have the same origin. You could have excluded that as well if it's all coming from the same source. And so you don't have to have every component, but the first couple ones are very helpful for our future analysis. All right, so let's get started. First question was about priority. So let's give it a name. Let's call it priority. Description, top priority for next round of bargaining. It's nominal, right? Because they're choosing different categories. And it is going to be, if it's coded, if we're going to code it, so if they said improved benefits, we're going to call it a 1. Working conditions, we're going to call it a 2. Then we would make the field type integer so that we know when we're doing the analysis, we're going to count the number of 1s. We're going to count the number of 2s. Remember, integer is whole numbers. If instead we were not going to code it, so we're not going to say this response is a 1, that response is a 2, but instead we are just going to leave it as everybody who chose improved benefits, the table says improved benefits, then we would change that field type to string. And so we would know we were analyzing text. Okay, it is not going to be unstructured text. It's still structured because they're still choosing from a group of texts, but it would be text-based as opposed to a number. And it would still be nominal regardless of whether you made the field type a string or an integer, because it's still picking a category. So this is all going to inform our analysis. The origin here is the survey. That's true for all questions. You'll notice here in the data dictionary, I have question 1A, and I've called this priority underscore write-in. So this is a variable that's related to the first. We're going to pull out the write-in responses, and we're going to create a separate section from them because they're going to have to be analyzed differently than the choose from the list part of question 1. So here we have write-in responses. It doesn't have a scale because it was open-ended. Anybody could put anything they wanted. The field type here is string because it's text. And the potential values doesn't list anything because it could have been any type of write-in response. We do put the relationship to the other variables is that there's an optional write-in for question 1. It's important to note this because what we could do with question 1 is when we pull out the open-ended responses as we clean up our data set, we could create a category 6 to our potential values that we just call other, so we know how many people wrote in a response, and then we would go to this separate variable here of the write-in to analyze that for themes. So we're fleshing out our data dictionary for each of our questions. So take a moment and see if you can come up with the rest of the data dictionary, right? So going back to our other questions here, of course you can scrub back in the video to the other questions. What would we put in to our data dictionary for these other components? So take a moment and see if you can't flesh out more of that. And recall, we'll just go back here, our data types, we're focused here on the first 4. The rest of it will come into play when we do some Python coding in a later video. So if it's text, it's string. If it's whole numbers, it's integer. If it's a number with decimals, it's float. If it is something that's true, false, then it is Boolean. Okay.